welcome to our event tonight, hosted by Friends of the Royal Alberta Museum. My name is Rav Buchenrein, and I'm the president of Friends of the Royal Alberta Museum Society. I'd like to welcome everyone this evening for a virtual talk on Abandoned Alberta, presented by Joe Chowaniec, and his photographic essay on buildings and the history of Alberta throughout the ages. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that we are webcasting from and to many different parts of Alberta today. The province of Alberta is located on Treaty 6, 7, and Treaty 8 territories, and is a traditional meeting ground and home for many Indigenous peoples. FRAMS respectively acknowledges that we are located on Treaty 6 territory, a traditional and ancestral gathering place for diverse Indigenous peoples, including Cree, Blackfoot, Métis, Nakota Sioux, Iroquois, Dene, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, Anishinaabe, Inuit, and many others. We acknowledge that many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit who have lived and cared for these lands for generations. We are grateful for the traditional knowledge keepers and elders who are still with us today and those who have gone before us. We make this acknowledgement as an act of reconciliation and gratitude to those whose territory we reside on or are visiting. Acknowledging traditional territory is one part of recognizing and moving beyond colonization and strengthening our relationship in a positive way. We honor and respect the history, languages, ceremonies, and culture of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit who call this territory home. There's just a few housekeeping items I'd like to acknowledge. We do have our Q&A section set up, so you can type away any questions that you may have. The schedule for tonight's event is that we will take a break about halfway through the presentation, where we'll do the Q&A session and then continue on with the second part of the presentation. And after that's done, we'll have another Q&A section should there be any questions remaining. Without any further ado, I would like to turn it over to Joe, and he can begin his presentation. Thank you.
Can you hear me, Rav? All's good?
Yes, I can.
Thanks, Rav, and Jessica and Drew behind the scenes. Thank you, the Friends of the Royal Alberta Museum Society, for having me tonight and hosting this webinar. Also, big thanks to the Royal Alberta Museum for hosting the exhibit of my photos and extending the exhibit to January 2022. Tonight's presentation is broken into two parts. Part one, I'll take a look at some of the pictures in the book and the exhibit. Then we'll take a short break, as Rav said, for questions. And then part two is a look at what's next. So who am I? I grew up in Fort McMurray. Pretty much my entire life's been in Alberta. I'm currently the executive director at the Environmental Services Association of Alberta, a nonprofit of businesses that do environmental cleanup work in the province of Alberta. My hobbies are travel, food, science fiction, and photography. Here's a picture from way back about 1900. My relatives had just immigrated to Canada and were sent out to Saskatchewan to a plot of land. They had just finished building their first sod hut to survive the first winter, and my grandfather is the smallest person in the photo, Joseph. I like to joke that I think they built the moonshine still first before they built the sod hut. So I get a lot of questions about the camera gear I use. Canon 7D is my main camera that I go to. I have another Canon I carry, an iPhone, bunch of lenses, tripod, drone, and some other supplies as needed. So Abandoned Alberta, publisher reached out to me in 2018 if I'd be interested in curating a book. I said yes, so the process started with over 1,000 photos that we narrowed down to 136 photos that are in the book. The cover image that you see there, which is the Nickerson House, was captured in January 2020, and it was the last photo that was captured for the book. Earlier this year, it finally gave in to gravity and fell. And the book was released in 2020. So as I traveled around the province of Alberta, either for work or vacation, I began to notice the abandoned homes and farms in the fields. It's not like they weren't there before, it's just that for whatever reason, my wandering mind started to notice them. At first, I would stop and look at the buildings and wonder what its story. Where did the people go? Why did they leave? In December 2016, I brought my camera along for one of my drives and saw through the viewfinder a glimpse of times past. As my shutter clicked and clicked, the journey began. While in many cases there are no stories, only the fading memories of families that have long since moved on, a few have extensive stories. As we all know, Alberta has a relatively short but rich history. Alberta became a province in 1905, but its history started long before that. Originally, the First Nation peoples populated the prairies. The first immigrants from Canada, French Canada, arrived in the 1870s, followed by the Methodists from Ontario in the early 18s, and then settlers from Utah in 1887. Shortly thereafter, settlers began arriving from European and Scandinavian countries. As I pondered the structure of the book and the path of my erratic journeys around Alberta, I remember there were many days that my wife, Rami, would ask me where I was headed, and I would respond, wherever the car decides to go. Since December 2016, I have covered over 15,000 kilometers of highways, range roads, and township roads, scouring the countryside for photographic opportunities. Someday I would easily cover 800 kilometers in a day and then come back with no photos. Other trips would be a gold mine of photographs. In the end, I decided to showcase Alberta's abandoned history in the same erratic way I traveled the province. As you turn the pages in the book, wander the museum exhibit, or visit my Facebook page, you'll never know what image you will see next. Of note, no photos are staged. They're taken as is, and the property was always respected. Only photos were taken, nothing removed or damaged. Also important, abandoned does not mean that there's no owner to the property or building, just that it is kept empty and neglectful. If you're out exploring, be respectful. Enjoy your journey through abandoned Alberta. This is St. Michael's Hungarian Catholic Church in central Alberta. About 4 years ago, it was scheduled to be demolished, and as June of this year, it was still standing, though in very rough condition. Its bell tower was lost to lightning a couple of times, so they finally gave up with putting a bell tower on top of it and just put a cross up. Um, so a beautiful old home in southern Alberta. Um, Probably a kit home, though no one knows for sure. Could have been an Eaton's home, but it was definitely shipped in boxes by rail and then carted 80 kilometers from the nearest railway station by cart and buggy to build this home. Polish Hall near Mundare. Um, Lots of these were around at the time, but not many more. They're few and far between. It's a beautiful old barn. I didn't want to disturb the canola when I took this photo, so this photo was taken with a drone. Um, it's one of my favorites, and I understand that the barn in the last year or two was a victim to arson, which is unfortunate. Grain elevator on the Saskatchewan Alberta border. Um, Grain elevators used to be the giants of the prairies, and now they're pretty much extinct. And just heard the ones in Warner, Alberta, and Southern Alberta are closing later this year. So a few more gone. This is the inside of this Springwater School in Southern Alberta. I believe it closed in 55. It was partially restored, and it's maintained by local farmers and kind of a security watch. But as you can see, it's abandoned. When you walk in the door, that's what it looks like inside. And all the red books that you see on the stage are actually bound copies of National Geographics from the 20s until it closed in the 50s. Another one of my favorite shots is this stopped me in my tracks when I was driving and I had to circle back and get a photo. To me, it looks like this old car was just driven across the field through the canola into this grass and just parked there and left. It's just, to me, it's kind of an iconic abandoned shot. When I came across this scene, it's four ball diamonds east of Edmonton, and just sitting there empty. I could imagine the noise, the hustle and bustle on a weekend when there was a ball tournament of all the local communities along that stretch of highway. It reminded me of Field of Dreams or W.P. Kinsella's um, book about Shoeless Joe. Um, there was something special about it, but as you can see, it's definitely abandoned and time has passed it on. It's a peaceful church. I think it's called the Highlands Church. It's long since abandoned. It sits beautifully in central Alberta on top of a hill. Um, since this photo was taken, the church has deteriorated severely, and one wall of the foundation is completely collapsed. So, unfortunately, I think it was just a matter of time, and this building will be just faded memories. This is the Hover Community Hall. No one really knows what its story is. It's a unique building. It's one third above ground and two-thirds below ground. So um, lots of conflicting stories about what its purpose was and why it was built like that. But it's something I haven't seen in the province as a building that's mostly underground for a community hall. This is the living room of a home in north central Alberta that family invited me out to the farm to come photograph. As you can see, um, nature slowly taking over. The carpet's turning to moss and grass. Trees are starting to grow in. The grandparents that owned this property had a fire in the house in the early 80s, left, and it sits there like this now, slowly fading away. Only memories to the families. This is the Roundhouse in Hannah. Um, it's believed to be the only remaining roundhouse in Western Canada with a complete intact turntable, which you see there, where the trains would pull in and it would turn and direct them into one of the bays of the roundhouse for maintenance and repairs. Um, the When I photographed this, it was still technically abandoned, but since then, the Historical Society has formed and is now restoring it. And hopefully, one day we'll have it up as a heritage site. They're getting their historical things, permits and stuff. So it's a good thing to see this being restored and saved because it's a pretty special, unique building. If you're ever in the Hannah area, stop in. If there's someone around, they'll be happy to show you around. The view of from the top of the Atlas coal mine overlooking the Badlands near Drumheller. Another place that anyone can go visit and tour. There's tours of the facility. You can go in some of the buildings and check it out. It's part of Alberta's history. We needed coal back in the day to keep warm. If you're ever in Banff and you're at Lake, traveling the road to Lake Minnewanka, and you see the signs that say Upper Bankhead and Lower Bankhead. This is Lower Bankhead, where the mine site was. It was a large coal mining operation, a population of around 1,000 people back in its heyday. This is the lamp house, or what's remaining of it. This is where the miners would collect their lamps and their tags before they went deep into the mine of Cascade Mountain. If you go to Upper Bankhead, there's no buildings remaining, but you can walk the trail up the mountain, and you can actually see the open shafts that are fenced off down into the mine. This is the Nordig mine site on the David Thompson Highway, abandoned mine. it's an aerial shot with my drone. All the buildings, complex is abandoned. Um, when it closed, the facilities were used as a prison by the province for an amount of time, and then it was just completely abandoned. Also of interest with this is when you see the wild horses around the Nordig area, they're descendants of the mining operations. When the mine shut down, the miners, instead of killing the horses, released them into the wild. And what when you're out in the highway and you see the wild horses, those are descendants from back in the day. So efforts are being made here also to restore some of the buildings and turn it into a bit of a museum. So hopefully they're successful doing that. And this is one of my favorite places to visit. A family contacted me to come out to their property. They used to own an international harvester dealership. Um, and this is the parts room. And what you see is what it is. They closed in the 60s, and it's like it's just time stood still in this place. The parts bins are all still numbered. The books are still there. It's pretty interesting. It's just they just decided to leave the business and sits there like this. So um, it's a pretty interesting place to explore. And Rav, with that, that's the first half of my slides. So if we have questions, be happy.
Sure thing, Joe. I noticed in one of the slides that you said you used a drone. Actually, there's a couple that I know, so you've probably used a drone to take the photos. So, how long does that process take?
Um,
To get it quite the way you want it.
um, well, you have to work quick because the drone battery life is 12 to 15 minutes. So I have a couple batteries. So I have a very short time frame to work. So snap a bunch of photos and hope they turn out, and if not, come back another time with charged batteries. Um, uh, the one with the canola field, like was one of the times I crashed the drone, caught a gust of wind, and it crashed. So I was lucky to get what I got from it. I got a couple of good shots, and since then I've since crashed my drone beyond repair. So I'm now in the market for a new drone.
Okay. Are there many places on your wish list to photograph that you have yet to visit in Alberta?
More of southern Alberta, which seems to be a gold mine. I got to the deep southeast this summer. We spent 4 days and 2,400 kilometers down there, my wife and I, and want to get to the southwest, and I want to get up to the Grand Prairie Peace River area and do some exploring up there. I have some invites to come photograph some stuff. So there's lots to explore. There's so much to explore.
Got a question here from Jackie. Do you have a favorite place to photograph?
Well, the International Harvester dealership I've visited a few times. The big Valley Roundhouse and the remains of the Roundhouse in Big Valley is not as complete as the one in Hannes, just this concrete shell. It looks like kind of a modern day Stonehenge. I kind of like that. It's to me, my favorite spot is probably where I'm at that day photographing. I can always find, even when I go back to places, I see something different that I didn't see before, and always find something interesting to photograph. And now a lot of time it's not even the photographs; it's more talking to the owners of the land or the people that have invited me out to photograph and just learning history and talking to them. It's that I find almost more interesting.
Do you have a favorite time or of day or season you'd like to take photos in?
Uh, Early in the morning or late in the evening or later, those magic hours for the sun's. Um, I don't like the direct sun. I like those blue Alberta skies with the wispy clouds. Um, and what was the second part? Sorry,
Season.
season.
Yeah.
Fall and winter. You'll see a lot of winter shots in the book, and there's something about winter. It's just it's bleak, but the blue and the white and the old buildings, it just kind of adds to the harshness of the times it must have been.
How do you learn the history and stories behind the places you photograph?
Um, a lot of it is I'll post one of the pictures I've shown on my Facebook page, and ask anyone if they know any history. And then next thing you know, I've got stories and more stories about it, and just start talking to people. And that it's mainly word of mouth and people contacting me and telling me. For instance, the photo that the friends of the Royal Alberta Museum used for the advertisement for this of the car. Shortly after I posted that picture, that car, the owners were contacted and the car was sold. So it's just word of mouth. It's that car is being restored and hopefully has a nice new home. So word of mouth. Lots of
Okay.
it's word of mouth.
Got a question from Sean here. How often do you stumble upon these places versus getting invited? And is there a particular area of the province you find more interesting abandoned places to photograph?
In the beginning, when I first started this, it was a lot of it was stumbling on my own and you know, maybe potentially trespassing, those types of things. But now it's mostly word of mouth, or I've partnered up with I've attended a couple of the. There's a guy in Calgary that offers abandoned photo tours, so I've gone on couple on his adventures where he has permission to visit properties. So it's a little bit of that. I really enjoyed when we were down in southern Alberta this summer on the Redcoat Trail, which was the rail line down there, which is long since gone. But all the ghost towns along that stretch of highway is simply amazing to see. Ghost town after ghost town after ghost town. I forget how many there is. It's there's there might be a school left or a slide or a church. It's really interesting. And then the really rich part of our area up here in Edmonton is the Polish Ukrainian east of Edmonton. The back roads out there are just littered with abandoned homes and churches and halls. It's quite frankly amazing.
How do you deal with the issue of permissions for your work?
Most if So if people have given me permission to photograph, that's easy. Other ones, if they're taken from the road or places like the Hannah Roundhouse or Big Valley or Bankhead, they're all publicly accessible sites. So those aren't an issue. And I've only ever had um, two run-ins with people that did not appreciate their stuff being photographed.
Question from Roger. What is involved in getting a provincial heritage designation, and are the funds then available?
I honestly don't know what's involved in the process. But I know from talking to the lady that runs the Hannah Roundhouse Society that once they got it, their the process to get on the historic registry, funding did become available for them for matching funding from the provincial government in terms of. I know they just replaced the roof and they've had some inspections done and some electrical work done. So that type of work is being funded through some process.
Okay. I have a question with just regards to the process itself. How do you decide whether you're going to shoot in color or black and white?
I'd rather shoot all in black and white personally especially for a lot of the old buildings and stuff. I just think it adds to them and their history. The publisher wanted color because they said color sells better, so we went with color. So a lot of time now it's what I think personally, what I think looks good. Um, a photographer I know from National Geographic, because I used to post on my Facebook page the same picture side by side in black and white and color, asked me, said to stop doing that. Just choose one and do it. Don't let people. You have to, as a photographer, you have to be confident in your work to say this is what I like, and not let people decide for you. It doesn't show confidence. So that was a valuable lesson I've learned. So I try to do 50-50 now when I'm posting stuff.
Okay, and that's it for questions.
Okay. Okay, we'll go into the second part. Um, might be a little shorter. Second here. So part two, the journey continues. So the first good news is, as you heard, the exhibit's been extended to January. Um, the second bit of good news is that there will be a follow-up book in September of 2023 that's coming out. So work is underway right now. I'm curating um, pictures and photos right now. Some of them you're going to see. For some of us seen them on Facebook. Some will be shown for the first time. So far this summer, I've traveled about 6,000 kilometers in 3 or 4 months on back roads, looking for places, talking to people, visiting places, and as I mentioned, on a tour. This is an old school that's almost completely covered by trees. I'm still researching the name of it and its history. Um, it's down in the Hannah area. This is one of the unique and neatest structures in Alberta. It doesn't look like much. It looks like a door, like a hobbit hole. Um, it's called the Sunny Slope Shelter. It's you can see the plaque on the door. It's actually a Alberta Heritage Site. Um, it's abandoned. It's accessible. The farmer just asked that you use the path and not use his field as a road or a path. Um, it's also known as the One Man Castle. So this is a sandstone shelter. The immigrant family that came from Europe, I can't remember the ancestry off the top of my head, um, built this because they didn't think they could get the house done in time for winter, so they built a sandstone shelter. So this is the door. There's stairs down into a room that's probably 10 by 10. That's where they lived for the first winter and a bit. It had a stove with a stack that went out through the mound behind it. And the stonework is amazing. It is straight as the day it was built. It's over 100 years old, and it's a pretty cool little place to stumble across and find. You can barely see it in the field, but it's there. This is one of the largest. Uh, they refer to it as a mansion at the time. I think it's called the Welch House um, in central Alberta. We'll say it's a large home, as you can see, well over 100 years old. Um, it's pretty spectacular to see homes this size on the Canadian prairies. This is down on the Redcoat Trail in the town of the ghost town or almost ghost town of Manyberries. It's often photographed. The remains of a truck with a cow skull on it, and it's just everyone seems to photograph it, so I had to as well. Inside of an old vehicle, um, seen better days, obviously, but probably lots of stories there, from the owners or the family that had it. Beautiful sunset out near Beaver Hill Lake. Um, the house is still standing, and the other farm buildings has collapsed, as you see. Um, don't know the history of this. Taken from the side of the road. This was on a recent abandoned photo tour in southern Alberta. 100-year-old house looking out through the kitchen window. You can barely see the barn in the background. The windows are covered in vines. The house is almost completely covered in vines now. It's kind of I don't have an outside picture to show, but that's the inside view. It's probably looks quite the view back in the day of just the barn and the field and the cattle. Church in northern Alberta. Took me some work to find. Um, all the roads around it were flooded, so trying to find it last summer was a challenge, but did make it. It's, I don't know its name or its history. Still, I have a pretty good idea, but I'm still looking for the information. But once again, there's a lot of old churches out and about in the countryside. I think many that most people have forgotten about. Interesting fact, I believe Lamont County is the highest number of churches per capita in all of North America. So, and this is outside Lamont County, but in the general area. Someone had a really good sense of humor. Um, Dinosaur in a cage in the back of an old truck. Kind of had to photograph it. Kind of priceless. Um, this was on a recent adventure in an old homestead. This was in the kitchen. The clothespins hanging from a wire from the ceiling, and the other end of the screw had come out of the ceiling, is just hanging there. And it looked like the stove was the only place to heat in the house. So this is probably where they hung their clothes and stuff to dry from the ceiling. And that's the the harsh winters is probably what they had to deal with, and they made the best of it. Old barn out in Viking. Once again, drone hovering off the ground shot. Haven't figured out it. I really like old cars. If I had a lot of money, I'd be restoring some. This is the outside of that car that you saw previously of the inside. Um, I really like seeing cars that have kind of just driven where it seems like they ran out of gas and they're just parked somewhere in a field, and the crops are growing through it and everything. Yes, it's an old piano. Um, it's probably, I'm thinking, looking at knowing the name of the piano brand. It was probably 100 years old. It's outside an abandoned monastery in northern Alberta. Um, I wish I would have been there a couple years earlier to find it when it was still standing in the trees. The building's long gone, but the piano's there. It's been stripped of its ivory. There's a little bit left. All the hammers are still there and all the wires, but you don't often see a piano lying in the woods. Um, I was out photographing another church, and a farmer came along and questioned what I was doing, and then he gave me a whole bunch of tips of some other places to visit. And this was a place where they dumped cars in the trees that he told me about. And when I saw this car, all I could think about was Bob Dylan's son's "Ban the Wallflowers" and "One Headlight." So the song "One Headlight." So it looks like the car has personality. It looks kind of sad. Um, Kind of like this one. Water pump. Wouldn't have survived. We wouldn't have. They wouldn't have survived long without water. And I just can't imagine trying to keep that running all winter in the cold winters of Alberta. Trying to keep your water pump functioning and running. So um, harsh times. From a couple of weeks ago, the remains of a truck cab, alone, abandoned, desolate, on a freshly cut wheat field with that beautiful Alberta wispy sky. Um, this will definitely be in the book. Pair of old work boots um, that were in a corner of a living room in a house we visited a couple weeks back down in southern Alberta. One can only imagine the miles and the stories those boots could tell. Um, it's seeing something like that really takes you back to think um, what people must have gone through and to survive. This was a couple on the same trip. The group of people that were on the trip, we stayed up late. It was a clear, moonless night. That's why the trip was planned for when it was. This is a 110-year-old. It was built in 1914, so 107-year-old house. We waited for for the Milky Way to appear, and there's a light on in the window. We put lights in the house, and there's a drone. The host of the trip, there's a drone flying out of scene with a floodlight, lighting up the scene so that we can get the house and the Milky Way. So imagine what back in the days living on the prairies, and that was your view on a cold winter night or a beautiful summer night. But probably good. No light pollution back then. Um, And this is yet another beautiful old home. Um, as you can see, it's collapsing, it's crumbling. I say probably a couple of years and it'll fall. Again, we lit it with a drone, a light on the front of it, and a light upstairs. Um, and I like this quote um, that old houses are full with memories, and that's why they resist to collapse. It's probably true. Probably a lot of stories and memories in there that who knows will ever be told. And this house is about 1910. And with that, thank you. Thanks again to the Royal Alberta Museum and the Friends of the Royal Alberta Museum. My website address is there, Facebook page, Instagram, Twitter. Encourage you to check it out. Also encourage you, if you're interested in the copies of the book, they are at the RAM gift shop and online at the RAM gift shop as well, or wherever you buy books. But I encourage you to check out uh, the RAM gift shop in particular, and also check out the exhibit. It's free. You just have to walk in the front doors and go up the stairs, and you're right there at the exhibit. So, um, thank you again.
Thank you, Joe. Let's see if we have a couple more questions here for you. Um, so with some of these photographs, obviously you've gone into these old places. How safe is it?
It's not. I'll be completely honest. It's not. At first, I did it by myself, which wasn't, as I've learned, isn't very smart. So that's why I've now started paying to go on these tours with this company that has permission to a lot of these properties, because better to go in numbers. Unfortunately, 2 years ago, a gentleman from Saskatchewan was exploring in southern Alberta, stepped on a piece of plywood in a field and fell into the well and passed away. So there's hidden dangers out there, and there's also asbestos and lead and other good things. And the buildings are in rough shape, so I always try to go with someone, if possible, especially if I'm doing interior shots. And just last weekend, I was down in a small town in Alberta. I was invited down to photograph the hotel before it's demolished. And I went in with another photographer, and the lady warned us, and I won't show the picture, but the third floor was 3 feet thick of pigeon poop. So quickly, I had my N95 mask on and stuff. I was out of there quickly because the smell, I couldn't handle it. So it's not, I've been scared a lot of times by pigeons and skunks and porcupines. So you can imagine the kind of things that wander out of buildings.
Have you ever photographed abandoned things or places within urban landscapes?
The Northlands Coliseum is in the book, in the exterior. The city wouldn't let me in to photograph the interior. The old tower at Blatchford Field, or the old municipal airport. I'm not really drawn to a lot of the stuff in the big urban. Too much graffiti and vandalism. Not that there isn't out in the field, but I others are doing that. I kind of like the rural stuff and the more of the history stuff.
Okay. Can you tell us about one of the two times the owners were not happy with you photographing?
One was, it's in the book. There's one of the only stone houses, and one of the few stone houses in Alberta. That was a number of years ago. I'd stumbled across it and took some pictures of it, and posted them on my page. And the owner contacted me and was not happy that I had taken photos of it. Granted, they were from the road, and so we had a discussion. I pulled them down. She was in the end fine with it, and in the end, after she realized what I was doing and talking about it and didn't disclose locations, which you'll notice in a lot of my stuff, I don't disclose locations. She was more than happy to let me include it in the book. So it's featured in the book. Um, the other recent time was someone giving me permission to be on the property to photograph a bunch of buildings and vehicles. Turns out they weren't the owners of the property. Um, they were just workers on the property, but I received advice from authorities afterwards that I was not in the wrong. I had received permission. So um, most of the times I have not had, other than the one with the last one I mentioned, people have been extremely good. And like I say, I've had one or two complaints out of hundreds of locations I've visited.
Okay. Do you have any plans to travel beyond Alberta's borders to photograph more abandoned places?
Well, wherever I go, I take my cameras. So occasionally I have featured on my my Facebook page, stuff from Saskatchewan, up from Churchill, Manitoba, shipwreck, plane wrecks, stuff over in Europe, in the United States. So if I'm out traveling, I will. My publisher, who's a Canadian publisher, has books out. One's called Forgotten Saskatchewan. One's called, I think it's the Grain Elevators or Prairie Giants. That's just come out of all the grain elevators and across the prairies. They have a book on Manitoba, another one on Nova Scotia. So they're building up a library of photographers that are doing other stuff. So I'll still take the pictures, but I'll still focus on Alberta for now.
Do your followers on social media give you tips on places to photograph?
Yep, they sure do. I'll post that, like when I was in Southern Alberta this summer for 4 days. I said I'm going to be down there. Anyone have any suggestions or family property that I could come visit? And I get suggestions and feedback. I asked them to directly message me, not to post it, because you don't need hundreds of people wandering down to someone's farm.
Okay, speaking of suggestions, we have one here from the Edmonton Historical Society. There's an old stone house by Onaway, as well as another on the Huguenin, Alberta, in case you want to check those out.
Okay, Onaway in New England. Okay,
Yeah.
and I know there's one on the Suffield military base out there, but you need to get the military to take you out, and I haven't got there yet. But there's a few. If you go into southern Saskatchewan, there's churches and barns and houses that are all stone that are impressive. It's availability of materials.
So a lot of these places, especially your churches, you try to find out the history behind it. So kind of what is your process in trying to do that? Like, who do you approach? Who do you talk to? Who do you call?
A lot of Google, a lot of research. Just the archives, the provincial archives. There's a couple other actual Facebook groups on Alberta's abandoned history, posting in there, asking people. But I'm now up to roughly close to 50,000 followers. So if I post something and I need history about it, someone knows somebody who lived there or worked there, or it's amazing what kind of reach that has. And a lot of times there's no history. There are halls I've taken pictures of. No one even knows anything about it. It doesn't even exist anywhere. You go in the archives, the online archives with the government, and there's no record, no photos, nothing.
Speaking of the archives, have they approached you at all for any photos or anything of that nature?
No, no.
Okay.
I approached them about in the book, you'll find there's a picture of the mining cart that I found washed out of the Mill Creek Ravine, and no one expressed interest. So it's been long since stolen by someone, but it was interesting to find a mining cart sticking out of the Mill Creek after a flood. So, yeah. But there's so much, there's so much, whether it's, as early as the Colosseum, to stuff that's over 100+ years old. There's so much out there. And I find so many people now sending me pictures of, or telling me, oh, I used to drive these roads all the time, I never noticed the houses before, and now I notice them. Now I notice the buildings. And another thing that really puts a smile on my face lately with everything going on in the world is I've had in the last couple weeks maybe a half dozen pictures of kids at the museum pointing at my pictures. This is their sending me their, family sending me their kid's favorite picture at the museum. So it's kind of cool to see that. I didn't think that this would have that kind of impact on people that people are appreciating it for what it is. A lot of people think it's junk and that they don't understand why someone hasn't burnt down these buildings or torn them down. But it's hard for the family, as the family with the shop that you see there. There's also grandma's house, which is featured in the book. And they explained to me that they're not a family of hoarders, they're a family of avoiders. They just don't know what to do with it and they can't bring themselves to get rid of it and tear it down because there's so much family history and memories, right? So,
Fantastic, Joe.
yep.
I think that's it for questions.
Okay.
I'd like to thank you
Thank you.
again for,
Yeah. Thank you guys
um,
again. And thanks to all the audience. Really appreciate working with you guys to pull this together.
I would greatly tell everyone who's here this evening to go to the Royal Alberta Museum on the second floor and take a look at the Abandoned Alberta exhibit that's currently displayed in the community gallery. It's absolutely amazing. And of course, if you get a chance to buy Joe's book at the museum shop, I recommend that as well, because I've done it myself and I've leafed through it a couple times because you notice something. I notice something every time I look at one of those photographs. There's something that I've missed or haven't keyed in on.
A
So
funny thing, so do I. I flipped through my book and I'm like, oh, I don't remember seeing that when I took the picture. And it's that. I really appreciate that.
yeah. So I would also like to thank Jessica and Drew for their work behind the scenes in getting this presentation off the ground. And again, thank you, Joe. It's been a long time in planning this. We had originally planned to do this, I believe, last December, right before December 13th, right before the museum actually
Yep.
closed down, and when the exhibit was going to launch. So it's only taken us about 9, 10 months to get around to it, but um,
We got to it.
we got to it
Yeah.
eventually. So,
Yeah. I really appreciate this again. Thank you. And everyone out there, stay safe.
yes, thank you, Joe. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening.